The horizon is flat and endless, the sea a mirror of shifting light. Then, with the slow inevitability of tectonic plates, a shadow rises. The blue whale surfaces, the largest animal ever to exist on Earth, moving with a deliberate grace that makes every other creature appear rushed and frantic. Its back arcs through the water like a rolling hill, flukes carving out their final sweep before vanishing beneath the surface. A blast of vapor erupts skyward, sunlight refracting into a shimmering halo, and then, just behind the towering animal, a bloom unfurls in the water. Rust red. An almost alien hue against the cobalt sea. Within days, that bloom will ripple outward in consequence, changing the very color of the ocean around it. This is the whale pump in action, one of the least appreciated yet most essential ecological forces on our planet. Blue whales feed in the ocean's darker depths, lunging into dense swarms of krill with mouths that take in more water than a swimming pool. But they do not release their waste in those depths. Instead, they surface to breathe, to rest, and to defecate. Their fecal plumes are loaded with iron, nitrogen, and phosphorus, elements stripped from the crust of the earth and concentrated in the bodies of the krill they consume. The whales return those nutrients to the sunlit surface, a place where photosynthesis thrives. In this way, the largest predator in the sea acts less like a destroyer and more like a farmer. Phytoplankton, microscopic drifting plants, respond instantly to this fertilization. A whale's plume can trigger blooms so vast they can be seen from space, turning blue water into green fields. In a matter of days, billions of single-celled organisms erupt into life, forming the base of the marine food chain. These phytoplankton generate not only food for zooplankton, fish larvae, and countless invertebrates, but also oxygen for the atmosphere. Every second breath you take owes something to phytoplankton, and in turn to the invisible fertilizing labor of whales. The whale pump is not poetry. It is physics and chemistry, a planetary scale cycling of life. But the whales are not just passive spreaders of nutrients. Their bodies themselves are engines of ocean mixing. Every deep dive carries oxygen-poor, nutrient-rich water from the surface downward, while their ascent brings trace chemicals from the depths up into the light. The massive sweep of their flukes entrains columns of water, stirring them in ways that resemble storms but on a subtler scale. Scientists tracking these flows have found that a single blue whale can vertically mix more water than the wind in certain regions. They are living pumps, reordering layers of the sea with every breath and every dive. The influence of whales extends even beyond life. When a whale dies, its body becomes a whale fall, an ecological event so immense it reshapes the seafloor. A single carcass weighing over 100 tons sinks through the twilight zone until it settles in darkness. Scavengers arrive first, sharks, hagfish, crabs, all stripping flesh in a frenzy of opportunity. Within weeks, the body is reduced to bone, but the story does not end there. Sulfophilic bacteria colonize the skeleton, breaking down lipids in the marrow and releasing hydrogen sulfide. Chemosynthetic organisms thrive, creating a miniature hydrothermal vent community without the vent. Tube worms, clams, and bizarrely adapted snails bloom in the darkness, sustained by chemistry rather than sunlight. For decades, that skeleton will anchor life in the abyss. One whale's death supports thousands of organisms across multiple generations. When we map the lives of whales, we see they do not wander aimlessly. Their migrations trace immense highways across ocean basins. Blue whales feed in polar waters where krill thrive, then travel thousands of miles to tropical and subtropical breeding grounds. These migrations are not just movements of bodies, but movements of nutrients. The whales eat in the nutrient-rich poles, then release that concentrated energy along their routes. In this way, they are engineers of ocean productivity, linking regions that would otherwise remain isolated. A blue whale surfacing off Central America carries in its body the productivity of Antarctica. A plume released in the equatorial Pacific contains the iron of southern seas. Whales write nutrient loops across basins with the arcs of their journeys. The scale of this influence is staggering. Before industrial whaling, populations of great whales were perhaps 4 or 5 times higher than today. Imagine oceans seeded not by thousands, but by millions of nutrient plumes, each one kick-starting blooms of plankton, each bloom feeding shoals of fish, each shoal supporting seabirds and seals. Historical reconstructions suggest that whales once sustained fish populations orders of magnitude greater than modern fisheries provide. The collapse of whale numbers was not just the loss of giants, it was the loss of ocean fertility itself. Humanity removed not only predators but the gardeners of the sea, yet recovery is possible. In regions where whales have rebounded, so too has productivity. Fisheries adjacent to recovering whale populations often show unexpected resilience, as if the ecosystem were knitting itself back together. Scientists now speak openly of whales as climate allies. By fertilizing phytoplankton, they help draw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and lock it away in the sea. By seeding blooms, they provide food webs that buffer against collapse. By sinking as whale falls, they export carbon to the abyss. The whale pump is not only about nutrient cycles, it is about climate balance, about the regulation of Earth's system on a planetary scale. There is irony here, though earned by the weight of truth. The largest predator ever known, a hunter of billions of krill in a single season, is also the ocean's greatest builder. Its hunger drives productivity, its waste creates life, its death feeds generations. This dual role collapses our simple notions of predator and prey, of consumer and provider. The blue whale is both. Picture once more that slow-motion surfacing. A giant back rises, a breath erupts, a red plume unfurls. It seems unremarkable in the moment, a detail almost comic. Yet hidden within that cloud is the iron that will spark a bloom, the bloom that will feed zooplankton, the zooplankton that will feed fish, the fish that will feed birds, seals, and people. In the rhythm of one whale's digestion lies the rhythm of the ocean itself. The whale pump is the heartbeat of the blue planet. The surface of the Southern Ocean is restless, fractured by shifting flows of pack ice and stitched with cracks that open and close with the tides. Then, in an instant, stillness shatters. A raft of penguins erupts from the water like a scatter of torpedoes, bodies arcing skyward before vanishing again beneath the waves. To the eye, it looks almost chaotic, but there is deep precision in this movement. Penguins are not improvising. They're executing a choreography refined over millions of years of evolution. For them, the boundary between air and sea is no barrier at all. Beneath the surface, the illusion becomes clearer. Penguins are birds, yet here in their true medium they transform into something that resembles flight. Their wings have become rigid flippers, narrow hydrofoils that beat with the same cadence as avian flight strokes, only tuned to a denser, resistant world. Each downstroke pushes their streamlined bodies forward with explosive force, while the upstroke recovers with minimal drag. Unlike most divers, penguins rely not on passive drifting, but on constant flapping, a form of underwater flight so efficient it outpaces the speed of many fish. At peak bursts, certain penguin species can reach velocities exceeding 20 miles per hour, fast enough to outmaneuver predators and drive deep into swarms of krill before they scatter. Close observation reveals the mechanics of this hydrodynamic mastery. As a penguin accelerates, trails of bubbles peel from its feathers, reducing drag in a phenomenon known as supercavitation. The structure of its plumage, dense, interlocking barbs coated in micro-layers of oil, traps air between feathers, releasing it in controlled bursts that function almost like an external lubricant. Combined with a belly contoured into sleek symmetry, the result is an animal engineered not just to survive underwater, but to thrive at speeds and efficiencies that rival any mammalian diver. Their ecological stage is just as finely tuned. The life of most penguin colonies hinges on the ice edge, the moving frontier where sunlight filters through broken flows, where algal blooms feed krill, and where krill, in turn, congregate in densities so high that they form living carpets beneath the surface. This edge is never fixed. It expands with the growth of winter ice, retreats with the melt of summer, and fractures unpredictably with storms and currents. Penguins must navigate this dynamic boundary with precision, timing their foraging trips to intercept the highest krill concentrations while balancing the distance to their nesting grounds. Too far, and chicks starve waiting for meals. Too close, and adults risk empty seas. The entire rhythm of a colony is thus tied to the pulsing boundary between light, ice, and plankton. When they return from these hunting forays, penguins do more than feed their own chicks. They become unwitting couriers of nutrients across ecosystems. The fish and krill they haul from sea to land are digested and excreted in the form of guano, massive deposits that streak rookeries in layers of red and white. Though unsightly to us, these guano fields are rich with nitrogen and phosphorus, creating oases of fertility in otherwise barren coastal zones. Algae flourish in the runoff, invertebrates multiply in the enriched soils, and entire shorebird communities capitalize on the productivity seeded by penguin colonies. In this way, penguins function as nutrient conveyors, transporting the productivity of the ocean back to land and redistributing it into new webs of life. Few other animals bridge ocean and land with such scale and consistency. Survival in these polar extremes requires more than efficiency in the hunt. It demands mastery of thermodynamics. In the icy waters of Antarctica, heat loss can be lethal in minutes for an unadapted animal. Penguins defend against this with a counter-current heat exchange system in their flippers and legs. Warm arterial blood flowing outward transfers heat to the cooler venous blood returning inward, minimizing loss to the environment. This allows their core temperatures to remain stable even as their extremities cool. Feathers add another layer of defense, densely packed at rates exceeding 70 feathers per square inch, overlapping to form an armor of insulation, waterproofed by secretions from specialized glands. Beneath that feather armor lies a subcutaneous fat layer that both insulates and fuels long fasting periods during breeding. But the most iconic of penguin thermoregulation strategies is social. When temperatures plummet and katabatic winds scream off the ice cap, penguins huddle. These huddles are not random mobs, but structured, dynamic collectives that function with remarkable physics. Individuals on the outer edge absorb the brunt of the cold, while those in the interior bask in relative warmth. Over time, penguins rotate positions, ensuring no bird bears the cost for long. Researchers studying emperor penguin huddles have likened them to a fluid, with waves of compression and relaxation rippling through the mass as birds shift. The result is a living, breathing insulation blanket that can raise interior temperatures by over 50 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the surrounding air. Survival here is not just individual but communal, proof that physics and cooperation can merge into an evolutionary strategy. Yet even as penguins embody adaptation, they are not without vulnerabilities. Their dependence on ice edges ties their fates to the health of polar seas. When climate change accelerates ice melt, shifts currents, or alters the timing of plankton blooms, penguins are forced into ecological mismatches. Adults may return to find chick-rearing periods out of sync with peak krill availability. Colonies that once thrived in stable regions may collapse when ice retreats too far from land, forcing foraging trips beyond sustainable ranges. Their role as nutrient couriers, as underwater flyers, as huddled survivors, is delicate, balanced on environmental predictability that is now unraveling. Still, their story is not merely one of fragility. Penguins reveal how intricately ecosystems are stitched together. They are not simply consumers of krill, they are links in a chain that ties atmospheric physics to microbial productivity to predator survival. By flying underwater, they convert planktonic life into bird flesh. By defecating on land, they transfer marine nutrients to terrestrial webs. By huddling, they demonstrate how cooperation and physics can be harnessed for survival. Every aspect of their biology, from feather microstructure to colony behavior, embodies an integration of ocean, land, and ice. Imagine again the raft exploding from the surf. It looks like chaos, but hidden within is the blueprint of balance. Each penguin's dive supports a chick, each chick's survival supports a colony, and each colony reshapes the coasts they inhabit. Through sheer abundance and relentless foraging, penguins become engines of ecological movement, stitching together domains that would otherwise remain separate. In their flight beneath the waves, They prove that birds can conquer the ocean without wings of air, and that the ties between land, sea, and ice are not incidental, but essential. Penguins are more than charismatic figures in tuxedo plumage. They are engineers, couriers, and survivors. In their world, the act of flying does not require sky. Only the density of water, the pulse of flippers, and the rhythm of survival written across frozen seas. They remind us that the boundaries we imagine between ecosystems are illusions. In truth, the ocean is stitched together by the persistence of creatures like these, moving nutrients and energy in both directions, writing balance into the blue planet one dive at a time. From above, the seafloor appears like a vast, rippling plain. Pale sand glows under clear, shallow water, but the surface is not barren. Rolling across this underwater landscape are meadows of seagrass, long green ribbons swaying with the tide. At first glance, the scene resembles a terrestrial pasture transposed beneath the sea. Yet here, instead of cows, the keepers of these meadows are far more ancient. A shadow moves slowly across the grasses, bulky yet deliberate. This is the dugong, the so-called sea cow, but unlike its terrestrial namesake, it does not simply graze, it cultivates. With each deliberate nip, it sculpts the productivity of entire ecosystems. A dugong's feeding trail is unmistakable. From a drone's vantage, one can trace the pale scars they leave behind, neat swaths of uprooted grass etched into the meadow like crop circles. Yet where they feed most heavily, a paradox unfolds. The scars are not the death of the meadow, but its renewal. Dugongs rarely consume every blade. Instead, they nip at intervals, trimming grass short and leaving behind beds primed for regrowth. These cropped patches often rebound more quickly than untouched areas, sprouting fresh shoots higher in nitrogen content and richer in energy. By pruning, dugongs keep the meadows young, preventing senescence in plants that otherwise accumulate fibrous tissues and decline in palatability. It is a system of cultivation, intentional or not, that makes the dugong one of the ocean's few true gardeners. This process of cultivation grazing has cascading consequences. Younger shoots attract not only more dugongs but schools of fish and swarms of invertebrates. Herbivorous fish feed on the new growth, carnivorous species target the fish, and the meadow becomes a hub of productivity. In places where dugongs are absent, seagrass blades often grow tall and tough, their tissues lignified, their nutritional content diminished. Fewer animals feed there, and the meadow slowly stagnates. Presence or absence of dugongs can thus spell the difference between a vibrant nursery and a declining monoculture. But dugongs are selective in their gardening. They do not graze at random, and their choices reveal an instinctive grasp of ecological balance. Seagrass meadows thrive only under a delicate relationship between light and sediment. Too much turbidity, suspended particles stirred by storms, trawling, or river discharge, and light fails to penetrate. Too little turbidity, and epiphytic algae coat seagrass blades, choking photosynthesis. Dugongs navigate these variables with precision. They forage most often where water clarity allows ample light, but where sediments still replenish nutrients. By moving between patches, they prevent overgrowth in one place and stimulate recovery in another. Their choices reflect not just hunger, but a finely tuned dance with the environment, one that maximizes regrowth for themselves and stability for the meadow. The stakes extend beyond food webs. Seagrass beds are among the most powerful carbon banks on Earth, burying carbon in sediments at rates that rival or exceed tropical rainforests. When undisturbed, their soils store carbon for millennia. Dugongs play a role in maintaining this bank. By cropping grasses and stimulating regrowth, they accelerate the sequestration process. Young, fast-growing shoots absorb more carbon than old, fibrous ones. Meadows maintained by grazing thus act like biological factories, capturing atmospheric carbon and locking it into sediment. Remove the gardeners, and the system slows. In some regions where dugong populations have collapsed, seagrass beds have become less resilient to disturbance, storing less carbon and recovering poorly after storms or heat waves. The dugong's life, however, is not confined to a single meadow. These animals migrate with monsoons, their movements tied to seasonal patterns of storm, current, and productivity. In tropical bays, calves are born in shallow embayments, sheltered from waves and predators. Mothers lead their young along feeding trails, teaching them not only how to graze, but where to graze. These embayments become nurseries, places where generations overlap, each calf imprinting on the rhythms of tides and monsoon winds. As the seasons shift, families move outward, tracking meadows across broader coastal shelves. Their migrations map the living pulse of tropical seas, a silent following of productivity that links ecosystems separated by hundreds of miles. But the dugong's survival strategy is also a vulnerability. They are obligate seagrass feeders, dependent entirely on the health of these meadows. When seagrass declines, from dredging, coastal development, nutrient runoff, or storm damage, dugongs cannot simply switch to another food. Starvation follows quickly. In places like the Arabian Gulf and parts of Southeast Asia, local die-offs of seagrass have led to mass strandings of dugongs, stark reminders of how tightly linked they are to their gardens. Unlike whales or seals, they cannot venture into the open ocean in search of alternatives. Their world is shallow, coastal, and perilously exposed to human impact. Despite this vulnerability, the ecological role of dugongs is outsized. By keeping meadows cropped, they not only boost productivity, but prevent ecological collapse. Without grazers, seagrass blades may grow too tall, slowing water flow and trapping sediments until meadows suffocate beneath their own success. Conversely, unchecked disturbance without grazers can convert meadows into barren sand plains. Dugongs act as stabilizers, preventing both extremes and ensuring meadows remain in a state of dynamic balance. Their feeding scars, far from being destructive, are signatures of resilience. The irony is that the very traits that make dugongs keystone species also make them conspicuous to humans. Their shallow foraging grounds overlap with fishing nets. Their slow movement makes them vulnerable to boat strikes, and their dependence on seagrass ties them to coastlines that are among the most heavily developed ecosystems on Earth. Populations have declined dramatically in many regions, with localized extinctions in places once rich with herds. In the absence of dugongs, entire meadows can shift states, becoming less productive, less biodiverse, and less effective as carbon banks. What vanishes with them is not only a species, but an ecological process, the cultivation of underwater lawns into factories of life. And yet, where dugongs persist, the evidence of their work is visible from above. The pale trails that ribbon across meadows are signs of continuity, of ecological function alive and well. In aerial footage, one can see these trails glowing like handwriting across the seabed, reminders that balance in nature is often maintained not by dramatic predators, but by quiet herbivores. The dugong does not inspire fear like a shark or awe like a whale. Its power is subtle, its influence hidden in cropped blades of grass and enriched sediments. But in that subtlety lies an importance that rivals any apex predator. By pruning, it speeds the meadow, by moving, it stitches ecosystems, and by surviving, it secures carbon for the planet. The gardener of the sea may not roar or breach, but it writes the future of coastlines with every slow, deliberate bite. The kelp forest rises like an underwater cathedral, shafts of sunlight filtering down through fronds that sway in the swell. Schools of fish flicker in and out of the green columns, compressed tight against the sanctuary of the plants. But at the forest's edge, where shadow meets the open blue, another form moves with an entirely different rhythm. Sleek, muscled and silent, a seal ghosts through the margin. Its body ripples like liquid metal, its head tilts once, and suddenly the fish collapse inward, crowding themselves into a living wall. In that instant you can see the true role of the seal in the ocean's architecture. Not merely a hunter, but a manager of fear, a middle-tier predator that reshapes the rules of where and when prey dare to move. Seals occupy a unique rung in the marine food web. They are mesopredators, wedged between the top-level giants like sharks and orcas and the smaller prey species they consume. This middle position grants them an influence that extends far beyond their numbers. When seals patrol a nursery ground, young fish and invertebrates abandon prime feeding areas, forced into suboptimal habitats where growth slows and vulnerability increases. In other places, their absence allows prey to spread unchecked, consuming resources too quickly and destabilizing the system. By simply existing, seals redistribute fear, tuning the intensity of grazing and predation across the ecosystem. They are not the rulers of the sea, but they are the ones who regulate its flow. To understand how a seal governs the sea, you must look beneath the surface of its physiology. Hunting underwater is not just about stealth, it is about oxygen. Every dive begins with a single breath, and from that breath the seal must stretch out minutes of pursuit. Their bodies are engineered for this economy. Hemoglobin and myoglobin concentrations in their blood and muscles are several times higher than in terrestrial mammals, storing vast reserves of oxygen. Their hearts can slow dramatically, a reflex called bradycardia, reducing blood flow to non-essential organs and conserving resources for the brain and swimming muscles. But even with these adaptations, efficiency is essential. That is where the stroke and glide strategy comes in. Instead of constant, exhausting propulsion, seals alternate powerful flipper strokes with passive gliding. Each glide conserves oxygen, while each stroke is timed to maximize thrust in dense water. Over the course of a dive, this pattern allows them to extend time beneath the surface, sometimes staying down for more than half an hour. On tracking data, their dives look like looping parabolas, bursts of descent followed by drifting arcs, each curve an echo of physics and physiology in partnership. When hunting, this strategy makes them unpredictable to prey, their acceleration masked by long glides that end in sudden strikes. The prey themselves are not static. In polar and temperate seas, seasonal changes reorder entire food webs, and seals adjust in response. In spring and summer, when ice retreats and productivity surges, they target swarms of fish and squid that bloom with the influx of plankton. In winter, when ice advances and prey distributions shift, seals may switch to benthic foraging, rooting along the seafloor for hidden invertebrates or fish resting in sediment. This flexibility stabilizes ecosystems, ensuring energy keeps flowing upward even when one prey source collapses. But in years when ice conditions fluctuate unpredictably, the balance can tip. If prey vanish or migrate beyond reach, seals may overexploit local pockets, destabilizing the very system they usually help regulate. The rhythm of seal predation is thus tied directly to the rhythm of climate, ice, and season. Advances in tagging technology have revealed just how sophisticated their foraging strategies can be. With three-dimensional dive recorders and GPS tags, scientists can reconstruct the underwater journeys of individual seals. The data show patterns resembling traplines, repeated circuits between predictable hotspots of prey. A seal may dive at one reef corner, surface to breathe, then arc back toward another kelp edge miles away, returning at intervals that match prey replenishment cycles. These patterns suggest memory, planning, and even cultural transmission, as younger seals appear to learn foraging routes from older individuals. A single seal's circuit can cover dozens of miles, knitting together patches of the seascape into a living network of pressure points on prey. Their role as mesopredators creates ripple effects that cascade across ecosystems. When seals are abundant, prey fish remain wary, spending less time grazing on algae or invertebrate nurseries. This in turn allows kelp forests to thrive, protected indirectly by predator-induced fear. When seals are scarce, whether from hunting, habitat loss, or competition with fisheries, prey fish grow bold. Grazing pressure increases, kelp thins, and the ecosystem can unravel into barren stretches. The balance between abundance and absence is delicate, but it is the seal's presence that so often holds the middle ground steady. Seals also reveal how ecology is inseparable from energy budgets. Every foraging trip is a calculation of risk and reward, oxygen spent versus calories gained. If prey are abundant and close, dives are shallow, short and frequent. If prey disperse, dives deepen. Oxygen costs rise, and seals must gamble on longer pursuits. This trade-off shapes entire populations. Mothers with pups, for instance, cannot risk long absences, so they rely on nearshore productivity. If local stocks collapse, pup survival plummets. In this way, fisheries and human disturbances along coasts strike hardest at the reproductive core of seal populations, with cascading effects upward and downward through the food web. The seal's position as both predator and prey complicates its role further. While they terrify fish shoals, they themselves live under the shadow of orcas and sharks. In waters where these apex predators are common, seals alter their behavior, shifting foraging times, avoiding open water, and clinging closer to kelp refuges. The fear of becoming prey reshapes their influence on other prey, demonstrating the layered hierarchy of marine ecosystems. Even middle managers must answer to someone above. Yet seals endure, adaptable and versatile. They thrive from the Arctic to the Southern Ocean, inhabiting beaches, ice flows, rocky coasts and estuaries. They are equally at home chasing squid in the open blue or ambushing fish along kelp margins. Their success lies not in dominance, but in balance. They tune the pressure between top predators and base prey, keeping energy flowing through the middle of the chain. They embody the concept of regulation, living proof that ecosystems are not governed solely from the top down or the bottom up, but also from the middle out. Picture again that leopard's sleek body sliding along the kelp wall. Prey fish bunched together, compressed by fear, feeding less, moving cautiously. The seal does not need to strike every time. Its presence alone reshapes the scene. This is management not by decree but by influence, written in the language of fear, oxygen, and opportunity. Seals remind us that the ocean's balance is not maintained by extremes, but by intermediaries. They are the invisible negotiators of the sea, tuning when and where fish dare to feed, and in doing so, shaping the forests, reefs and coasts that depend on those decisions. The ocean's middle managers, quiet and sleek, hold the line between abundance and collapse. The light is fading on the reef. Shadows stretch long over the drop-off, and the bright frenzy of daytime fish softens into cautious movement. The coral wall falls away into cobalt depths, a vertical expanse patrolled by currents. Against this backdrop, a single shape hangs motionless. It is a giant grouper, its bulk rivaling the size of a small person, mottled skin blending seamlessly into the reef wall. For long minutes it does nothing, a statue suspended in the water. Then, with a flick of its immense jaws, the silence breaks. A fish vanishes, swallowed whole, and the water hardly stirs. No chase, no struggle, just sudden, absolute predation. Groupers are ambush artists, and the architecture of coral reefs is their hunting stage. Flow shadows, those quiet zones behind corners, ridges and outcrops, are their chosen positions. Currents sweep nutrients and plankton across reefs, drawing smaller fish into predictable routes. Where the flow breaks, fish pause to feed, orient, or rest. Groupers claim these notches and corners, turning them into invisible toll gates. They do not need to move far or waste energy on long pursuits. Instead, they let the reef deliver prey, and with a burst of suction generated by cavernous mouths, they pull victims inward faster than the eye can follow. The water barely ripples, and the reef resumes its rhythm as if nothing has happened. Efficiency at this scale is not just skill but survival strategy. Their feeding mechanics are feats of biological engineering. When a grouper opens its mouth, it expands its buccal cavity with astonishing speed, creating a vacuum that draws prey in, along with a surge of water. The acceleration is so sudden that even alert fish already on edge cannot react in time. Unlike pursuit predators, the grouper spends little energy chasing. It invests in patience, conserving energy until the instant of strike. This economy allows groupers to grow massive, some species reaching more than 500 pounds, holding positions on reefs for decades. But the grouper's story is not limited to solitary ambush. Their social lives, when revealed, are no less extraordinary. Once a year, across much of the tropics, groupers gather in spawning aggregations so dense they transform entire reef passages. These gatherings are synchronized to lunar cycles, timed with precision to currents that carry fertilized eggs away from predators and into nutrient-rich waters. Thousands of groupers, normally solitary, converge at known sites, layering their bodies in clouds above drop-offs and channels. The water fills with gametes, a broadcast of potential spread across miles of sea. These aggregations, however, are also their greatest vulnerability. Poachers and fishers who know the timing and location of these events can decimate entire populations in a single season. Remove the spawning adults, and a grouper population that took decades to build can collapse almost overnight. This fragility is magnified by the fact that many groupers are slow-growing and long-lived. A fish that rules a wall today may have been there since before a human generation was born. Protecting spawning aggregations has become one of the critical conservation strategies for reefs, a recognition that without these yearly pulses, the walls risk falling silent. Groupers are not always solitary. In some regions, divers have observed them cooperating with moray eels in hunting. The partnership seems improbable, one a massive ambusher, the other a serpentine prowler weaving through coral crevices. Yet together they expand the hunting volume of both. The eel flushes prey from tight spaces, driving fish into the open where the grouper lies in wait. In return, the grouper herds prey into holes where the eel finishes the job. Communication appears to be part of the dance. Groupers have been documented performing headshakes or body postures that summon eels to join a hunt. Whether intentional coordination or learned mutual benefit, the result is a hunting team that no prey can easily escape. The grouper's influence extends far beyond its own meals. On reefs where groupers are abundant, smaller fish live with a constant undercurrent of fear. Herbivorous fish graze cautiously, darting between patches of algae rather than feeding openly. This restraint prevents overgrazing, allowing algae and corals to remain in balance. But in places where groupers have been heavily fished, the behavioral tone of the reef changes. Without their looming presence, herbivores feed more boldly, stripping algae with less hesitation. The result can be subtle at first: shifts in grazing patterns, changes in coral recruitment, but over time it can tip entire reefs toward algal dominance. By simply existing, groupers enforce restraint, their presence a form of governance on the reef's smaller residents. This quiet governance is what makes them so central to reef ecology. Unlike sharks, whose drama is written in sudden attacks, or parrotfish, whose grazing is visibly sculptural, groupers exert influence invisibly through pressure, absence, and timing. Their ambushes are not just acts of predation, but lessons in caution for all who witness them. Prey species adjust behaviors across the entire reef, avoiding wall notches, staying higher in the water column, or feeding at different times of day. Every shift reverberates upward and downward, altering the availability of food for other predators, the survival of coral recruits, and the structure of the community itself. Their role as wall owners is not poetic exaggeration but ecological fact. A healthy reef often has one or several dominant groupers, each claiming a section of wall, each altering the behavior of countless other fish. Remove the owner and the wall changes hands, sometimes to smaller predators, sometimes to none at all. The loss is not simply a reduction in biomass, but a collapse of authority, a void that reshapes behavior across the reef. Consider the dusk moment once more. The reef falls quiet, shadows lengthen, and fish school tightly near the coral face. The grouper remains motionless, its bulk blending into the structure. Every fish nearby knows it is there, and that knowledge alone changes how they act. Few creatures exemplify power through patience so completely. The grouper reminds us that ecosystems are not governed only by visible drama or charismatic spectacle. Sometimes they are managed by quiet presences, animals whose power is in what they prevent rather than what they consume. By anchoring walls, by shaping fear, by enforcing restraint, the grouper is the reef's behavioral governor. Without it, the rules collapse and the balance tilts. In this way, the grouper is both a predator and a steward, both a hunter and a regulator. It waits in shadow, silent but decisive, writing order into the reef with every slow, deliberate strike. The reef at dusk slips into a different register. Sunlight fades, the bright parrotfish and wrasses vanish into crevices, and a hush spreads across the benthic city. But in the cracks and caverns, life is only beginning to stir. Antennae, long and crimson, wave cautiously from the shadows. Then a body follows, armored, spiny, jointed like a suit of ancient mail. One by one, lobsters emerge from their communal dens, probing the water with sensory organs more delicate than any whisker, feeling vibrations, reading chemical signals, mapping the dark. By night, the reef belongs to them. The spiny lobster is not large by the standards of marine predators, but its influence far exceeds its size. Unlike the solitary grouper or the patient seal, lobsters move as patrolling armies, each individual venturing into the night with a plan written in instinct and chemical exchange. Their sorties begin from dens often shared by dozens of individuals. Within these rocky shelters, they coordinate without speech or sight, communicating instead through urine-borne signals. To us it seems crude. To lobsters it is a language rich in status, readiness and intent. The dominant males release pheromones that suppress aggression, organizing order within the group. Subordinates adjust their behavior accordingly, reducing costly fights. By the time darkness falls, hierarchy is established, and the night patrol begins with a strange cohesion, as if the reef itself had released a small, armored militia. Each lobster sets out along a path both familiar and newly improvised. Navigation in this alien landscape is not guided by sight, but by smell. Their antennules, covered in chemosensory hairs, sweep continuously, sampling the seawater for faint traces of food, predators and companions. Studies have shown that lobsters can detect concentrations of amino acids so low they border on the molecular limits of perception. In other words, they taste the reef in gradients invisible to us. But chemical maps alone are not enough to explain their migrations. In regions like the Caribbean, lobsters travel hundreds of miles in single-file lines known as lobster marches, seasonal pilgrimages that draw individuals from across wide stretches of seafloor. How do they stay oriented in the open blue, where landmarks vanish? Evidence suggests they sense the Earth's magnetic field, adjusting course by faint cues imperceptible to most animals. Together, smell and magnetism write the compass by which lobsters patrol their territories and undertake their long migrations. The patrol itself is a paradox of patience and violence. Lobsters spend much of the night foraging slowly, scraping algae, probing sand, and prying at small invertebrates. But their role as reef regulators is revealed most clearly when they confront sea urchins. Urchins are formidable in their own right, armored with spines and defended by venom in some species. Yet lobsters have mastered the art of their defeat. A lobster will seize an urchin with strong claws, wedge it against rock and flip it, exposing the vulnerable underside. With a swift crunch of mandibles, the test breaks and the soft tissues inside are consumed. The act seems brutal, but the consequences ripple outward through entire ecosystems. Sea urchins are voracious grazers. In balance, they help maintain algae in check, allowing corals to thrive. But when their predators decline, urchins can explode in number, stripping kelp forests down to barren wastelands of rock and rubble. These urchin barrens support little life compared to the lush, towering kelp they replace. By preying on urchins, lobsters prevent these collapses, toggling ecosystems back toward productivity. The difference is visible from space. Satellite imagery of kelp forests shows vibrant green, where predators like lobsters remain abundant, and ghostly grey where urchins have run unchecked. In this way, the lobsters' nightly patrols are not random hunts, but critical ecological interventions, safeguarding forests that stretch for miles and shelter countless species. The irony is that such a keystone role belongs to a creature many view as nothing more than seafood. Fisheries for spiny lobsters are some of the most lucrative in the world, driving intense pressure on populations. Yet their slow growth and late maturity make them vulnerable. Remove too many large individuals, and the keystone effect weakens. Urchins rebound, forests collapse, and fisheries themselves suffer as productivity plummets. Recognizing this, many regions have implemented size and season protections, ensuring that lobsters are not harvested before they can reproduce, and closing seasons during key spawning periods. These measures, though often resisted at first, have proven vital. Where enforced, they not only stabilize lobster populations, but maintain the integrity of entire ecosystems. where ignored, collapse follows. The lobster is not just a commodity, but a foundation stone of marine resilience. The lobster's resilience, however, is not merely ecological, but biological. They are among the most enduring creatures of the reef, with lifespans that can stretch over half a century. Their bodies grow slowly, molting in dramatic episodes that leave them vulnerable for days, yet each molt renews them, allowing repair of damage and regeneration of lost limbs. In the eerie light of the reef at night, one can sometimes see individuals with claws of uneven size, evidence of battles fought and won, or antennae regrown after predation attempts. Their longevity and ability to withstand repeated losses make them survivors, but also mean that each individual carries decades of ecological memory, a living thread in the continuity of the reef. Night patrols are not without danger. Octopuses stalk the same reefs, and moray eels lurk in crevices that lobsters must navigate. Sharks and large groupers ambush them when they venture too boldly into open ground. Yet lobsters have evolved behaviors to counter these threats. They often march in small groups, leveraging safety in numbers, and when confronted, they adopt a collective defense, pointing antennae outward and producing rasping stridulations by rubbing parts of their carapace. This sound, amplified underwater, can startle predators, buying the group precious seconds to retreat. In their dens, they adopt similar strategies, clustering with antennae out in every direction, forming a living barricade of spines. These defenses reveal a creature not only armored in body but in behavior, capable of collective survival tactics rare among invertebrates. The ecological balance lobsters enforce is clearest when contrasted against their absence. In regions where overfishing has stripped populations, kelp forests collapse into barrens and biodiversity dwindles. Where lobsters remain, forests tower, fish populations thrive, and productivity soars. This stark contrast underscores their identity as small apexes, not at the very top of the food chain, but high enough to cascade downward through every level below. Their work is invisible by day, revealed only when divers brave the night and watch the red antennae probing the reef floor, flipping urchins and consuming with quiet determination. Picture again the scene. The reef dark, moonlight slanting through water, a lobster emerging from its den. Its armor gleams faintly, its antennae sweep wide, and its mandibles work silently as it pries an urchin from its perch. A flip, a crunch, a meal taken, and with that small act, the kelp forest endures another night. The lobster does not know it guards a forest, nor that satellites will trace the health of its work. But the truth remains, without these patrols, forests fall. In the grand theater of the ocean, where whales fertilize basins and sharks strike with drama, lobsters play an understated role. Yet their nightly work is no less consequential. They are gardeners of kelp, regulators of reefs, custodians of balance. Each sortie into the dark is part of a collective defense of ecosystems older than cities, more productive than rainforests, and more fragile than they appear. To see them only as crustaceans on a plate is to miss the deeper truth. Lobsters are the night managers of the sea, small apexes whose patrols hold whole forests upright. The reef at low tide is a cacophony of movement if you know where to look. At first glance it appears still, a static collage of coral heads, rubble and algae. Then a shell twitches, another inches forward. A third erupts in a sudden scuffle, legs clattering as two hermit crabs wrestle over real estate. A moment later, one scuttles away victorious, dragging a newly acquired home across the sand, while the other sulks back into the shadows. Nearby, a third opportunist slides into the abandoned shell, completing the chain. In this miniature marketplace, every vacancy is contested, every upgrade fought over, and every resource recycled. To watch crabs is to glimpse an economy in motion, an ecosystem governed by rules as fierce as any trading floor. Crabs are the recyclers of the sea, detritivores par excellence. They thrive not on glamour, but on waste, reducing what others leave behind into usable energy. When a fish dies and sinks to the sand, when coral expels mucus in stress, when algae sloughs away dying fronds, crabs arrive. Their claws pick apart carrion, shred mucus, and return nutrients to circulation. This process is not mere scavenging, it is the ocean's cleanup service. Without it, carcasses would linger, nutrients would stagnate, and microbial blooms could overwhelm fragile balances. By turning decay into food, crabs accelerate decomposition, fueling cycles that sustain the productivity of entire reefs. They embody the principle that nothing in nature is wasted if someone can eat it. But crabs are not only recyclers, they are also thieves. Nowhere is this clearer than in the economy of shells that hermit crabs inhabit. Unlike most crustaceans, hermit crabs lack hardened abdomens, relying instead on borrowed snail shells for protection. These shells are limited commodities, and competition is fierce. When a shell becomes vacant, it triggers a cascade of interest. Hermit crabs gather, sometimes in groups of half a dozen or more, forming what scientists call vacancy chains. The largest crab claims the best fit, displacing others into smaller shells until the chain settles. Sometimes fights break out, with claws clashing in tests of strength. Other times the exchange is almost polite, individuals lining up by size as if in an orderly queue, each stepping into a better shell once the larger one has moved on. The evaluation process itself is remarkable. Hermit crabs tap shells with their claws, a behavior called shell wrapping, assessing thickness, weight, and internal space through sound and vibration. They use chemosensory hairs to detect traces of the previous occupant, determining whether the shell is truly vacant or whether it harbors risk. In these moments, crab behavior resembles a form of economics, with individuals weighing costs, benefits, and risks before making a move. For the casual observer, it is a comic scene, a crowd of crustaceans fussing over snail shells. But in reality, it is survival distilled into an exchange of property. Shells mean safety from predators, protection from desiccation, and the chance to grow. Without the right shell, a hermit crab's life is cut short. Beyond the marketplace of shells, crabs function as engineers of the benthos. Burrowing species excavate sand and sediment, aerating layers that would otherwise stagnate. Their tunnels create microhabitats for worms, small fish, and invertebrates, while also mixing oxygen into the substrate. This bioturbation enhances nutrient cycling, supporting seagrass beds and coral rubble fields alike. On coral heads themselves, tiny coral gall crabs take on defensive roles. Living within crevices or beneath coral branches, they defend their hosts against predators such as crown-of-thorns starfish. When a starfish arm creeps toward living coral, the crabs rush to attack, nipping at delicate tube feet and forcing retreat. In exchange, the coral provides shelter and food, a symbiotic partnership that demonstrates how even small crustaceans can tip the balance in favor of reef survival. Yet crabs are not merely caretakers. They are opportunists, ready to seize what others cannot guard. They raid fish nests for eggs, pilfer food from larger predators, and sometimes even attack weakened prey outright. Their reputation as thieves is well earned, but this opportunism also makes them resilient. Where others fail, crabs adapt, feeding on whatever resource appears, recycling what would otherwise vanish. They are survivors not because they dominate, but because they exploit niches no one else can. In their diversity lies their strength. The world hosts over 6,000 species of crabs, each filling a slightly different role. Some, like the decorator crabs, camouflage themselves with algae and sponges, carrying fragments of the reef as moving gardens. Others, like fiddler crabs, wave oversized claws in territorial displays that double as mating signals, turning beaches into fields of semaphore. Even in the deep sea, crabs scavenge whale falls and hydrothermal vent communities, extending their recycling role to realms few other animals can reach. Everywhere there is waste or opportunity, crabs are present, stitching together ecosystems from fragments of decay. Their importance becomes clearest in their absence. In systems where crabs have been overharvested, detritus accumulates, nutrient cycling slows, and reef health declines. Fish eggs, once guarded by the threat of predatory crabs, suffer increased predation by other opportunists, shifting balance in unforeseen ways. Conversely, when crabs are abundant, the recycling loop tightens, food webs accelerate, and productivity soars. They are not top predators, yet their influence is profound, woven through the very metabolism of the sea. And their impact is not purely ecological, it is also behavioral. On reefs where crabs defend corals, starfish outbreaks are less severe, coral cover remains higher, and biodiversity flourishes. On sandy flats where burrowing species are dense, oxygen penetration extends deeper, supporting microbial communities that in turn fuel surface productivity. In tide pools where hermit crabs trade shells, resource competition prevents monopolies, ensuring that populations remain dynamic. These behaviors reveal crabs as agents of balance, shaping systems not through brute force, but through constant small interventions. To watch a hermit crab marketplace is to witness this truth condensed into spectacle. A snail shell drops, 3 crabs converge, 2 fight, 1 upgrades, and another seizes the cast-off. Within minutes, the entire community has shifted. Each individual slightly better protected, each shell better matched to its occupant. In this endless recycling, nothing is wasted, and every act of theft becomes a redistribution. There is a certain humor in the sight, small creatures scuttling, arguing, swapping shells as if bartering in a marketplace. But beneath the comedy lies serious function. These exchanges keep populations mobile, prevent stagnation, and recycle resources into continuous circulation. Just as money changes hands to fuel human economies, shells change claws to fuel crab survival. Crabs turn waste into wealth, debris into opportunity, shells into currency. They are the accountants of the reef, the recyclers and thieves who ensure nothing valuable remains unused. In the grand structure of the ocean, where whales fertilize basins, seals redistribute fear, and lobsters guard forests, crabs work in the margins. Yet those margins are vital. They keep the reef clean, they redistribute property, they defend corals, and they aerate sediments. They do not dominate with size or speed, but with persistence and adaptability. They remind us that ecosystems are not built only by giants, but also by armies of the small, the many, the unseen. Picture the reef once more. Dusk falling, a snail shell tumbling, 3 crabs scuttling, 1 winning. It is a scene at once comic and profound, a microcosm of survival that mirrors the very laws of economy and ecology. Crabs may be recyclers and thieves, but in their endless opportunism, they uphold the reef itself. The kelp forest sways like a living cathedral, golden fronds stretching upward toward the light, each blade a photosynthetic engine drawing energy from the sun. Beneath this towering canopy, shadows pool and predators prowl. But drop to the seafloor, push in close, and the grandeur narrows to something far more intimate. A sea urchin. A small orb, bristling with spines, creeps across the substrate at a pace so slow it seems almost still. Yet watch long enough and you'll see the jaws at its center, a strange 5-part contraption rasping against rock and algae. This structure, called Aristotle's lantern, is one of the most remarkable feeding tools in the ocean. Its teeth grind ceaselessly, scraping surfaces bare, clipping kelp stipes, and reducing living tissue to digestible fragments. In the silence of the deep, the lantern's rasp is the sound of a grazer at work. It is easy to dismiss the sea urchin as inconsequential, a palm-sized grazer dwarfed by the grandeur of the kelp it consumes. Yet its appetite is relentless, and its numbers, under the wrong conditions, can swell into ecological force. When predators are abundant, lobsters, sea otters, and large reef fish, the urchins are kept in check. Their grazing is balanced, their population scattered, and the kelp forest thrives. But when those predators are removed by overfishing or hunting, the urchins surge. They swarm across the seafloor, clipping kelp from its holdfasts, stripping rocks of algae, and converting lush forests into barren moonscapes. Scientists call them urchin barrens, vast tracts of empty substrate where productivity crashes and biodiversity collapses. The transformation can be abrupt, a tipping point where balance is lost and the system pivots from feast to famine. The mechanics of this collapse are rooted in feedback loops. Kelp forests are highly productive, but they depend on dense canopies to shade the seafloor and suppress algal competitors. When urchins begin grazing holdfasts, the canopy thins, more light reaches the bottom, and filamentous algae proliferate. This shift favors urchins further, providing alternative food even as kelp disappears. With kelp gone, herbivores that depended on it vanish, predators that hunted within the forest decline, and the urchins remain, now feeding on microbial films, coralline algae, even bare rock itself. Their metabolism slows, and they can persist for years in a kind of starvation state, waiting for new growth. If kelp tries to return, the gaunt urchins swarm to consume it. The system locks into a barren state, resistant to recovery without outside intervention. Yet even in collapse, natural reset buttons exist. Disease is one. Periodic outbreaks of urchin wasting syndrome have swept through populations, reducing numbers dramatically and allowing kelp to rebound. The causes are complex: viral pathogens, environmental stressors, shifts in temperature and oxygen. But the consequences are profound. In the wake of die-offs, forests re-establish, predators return, and productivity surges once more. Storms also play a role. In high-energy coasts, massive wave events can scour urchins from rocks, clearing ground for kelp spores to settle. When predators remain to suppress regrowth, balance restores. These natural cycles remind us that barrens are not permanent, but they are also reminders of fragility. Without predators, recovery is temporary. The next urchin boom brings collapse anew. The role of predators in this system cannot be overstated. In the Pacific Northwest, sea otters serve as keystone regulators. Where otters are abundant, urchins remain small and cryptic, hiding in crevices and feeding cautiously. Kelp forests flourish, anchoring entire marine food webs. Where otters were extirpated during the fur trade, urchins expanded unchecked and kelp disappeared. Reintroduction of otters has reversed this in some regions, demonstrating the speed at which predator pressure can toggle ecosystems. In temperate reefs elsewhere, lobsters and large wrasses play a similar role. Their predation maintains urchins at densities that sustain balance. Remove them and the system tips. The message is clear. Urchins are not villains, but without predators, their grazing turns catastrophic. Humans, ironically, have begun to play the role of predator through fisheries. Urchin roe, particularly in Japanese cuisine as uni, has driven lucrative industries. In some places, divers target urchins deliberately, removing them from barrens to restore kelp. This practice, sometimes called urchin ranching, represents a fusion of conservation and commerce. By harvesting roe-rich urchins, fishers create economic incentive while simultaneously reducing grazing pressure. In carefully managed systems, kelp rebounds, fish return, and biodiversity recovers. But the danger lies in imbalance. Overharvesting without kelp recovery can destabilize further, while markets tied to roe quality can discourage removal of the starvation-hardened urchins that dominate barrens. Fisheries, then, can be both solution and complication, a human lever with ecological consequences that demand precision. The biology of the urchin itself is a marvel of adaptation. Despite their apparent simplicity, they possess decentralized nervous systems that allow remarkable responsiveness. Spines act not only as defense but as sensory organs, detecting vibrations and chemical gradients. Tube feet, powered by a hydraulic water vascular system, allow locomotion, adhesion, and manipulation. The Aristotle's lantern, with its 5 self-sharpening teeth, is continuously renewed, each tooth replaced as it wears down. This capacity for regeneration extends to the body. Urchins can regrow spines, tube feet, and even parts of their internal organs. Their resilience is one reason they can dominate ecosystems once released from predation. They are built to persist. Yet persistence is not the same as productivity. In barren states, the ocean loses much of its function. Kelp forests sequester carbon at rates rivaling terrestrial rainforests, buffer coastlines against waves, and provide habitat for hundreds of species. Remove them, and those services vanish. Barrens support far fewer species, far less carbon capture, and far less resilience. What is left is a simplified system, stable only in its poverty. A palm-sized grazer has undone an ecosystem that towers meters high and stretches miles across. The story of the sea urchin is thus a lesson in disproportionate influence. They are not apex predators, not charismatic giants, yet they wield power over coastlines entire. They reveal the fragility of balance, the ease with which systems tip from abundance to collapse, and the necessity of predators to hold grazers in check. Their lives are written in rasping teeth, patient persistence, and the paradox of overabundance. Too few, and kelp thickens unchecked. Too many, and forests fall. Imagine again the macro view, the lantern's teeth grinding at microscopic algae, scraping rock, rasping kelp stipes. Pull back, and the camera reveals a barren moonscape stretching outward, empty rock where forests once swayed. Pull back further still, and satellite images confirm it. Vast regions of coast converted by tiny mouths into desert. Then, years later, a storm clears them, otters return, and kelp surges skyward again, golden forests blooming from rubble. The urchin is the pivot, the toggle, the lawnmower that keeps growth in check, and when unchecked itself, levels entire coasts. In the silent work of these spiny grazers lies one of the ocean's most dramatic truths, that power is not always in size or ferocity, but in persistence multiplied. A single urchin does little, but millions change the world. The tide pools glisten under a retreating sea, shallow pockets of life cradled in stone. Among barnacles, mussels, and small crabs, a shape moves almost imperceptibly. At first it appears as nothing more than a lump of textured skin, mottled in hues that mirror rock and algae. But watch closely, and the arms begin to creep forward, thousands of tube feet extending and retracting in concert. Each foot is no larger than a grain of rice, yet together they move the body with patient certainty. This is a starfish or sea star, and its pace hides a capacity for power that rivals any predator of the intertidal zone. The mechanics of its movement are a marvel of hydraulic engineering. Each tube foot operates through a water vascular system, a network of canals that pump seawater into tiny ampullae, creating suction and extension. By coordinating these thousands of hydraulic pistons, a starfish can cling to rock with a grip strong enough to resist crashing waves or the tug of a human hand. The adhesion is not permanent. They can release at will, their tube feet capable of both suction and chemical bonding. Though they lack muscles in the traditional sense, starfish manipulate pressure with such finesse that they rival the grasp of far larger creatures. Their nervous system is decentralized, with no central brain but rather a nerve ring and radial cords that synchronize feet across arms. The result is a distributed intelligence, a body that thinks with its limbs, coordinating thousands of decisions into one seamless march. Their prey, however, often dwarfs them in strength. Mussels and clams close their shells with powerful adductor muscles, capable of resisting predators far larger than a starfish. Yet the starfish has evolved a method so patient and relentless that it overcomes even this defense. It attaches tube feet to both valves of a shell and begins to pull, exerting steady tension for hours, even days. The bivalve tires long before the starfish does. Eventually, a gap forms no wider than a hair. That sliver is enough. The starfish everts its stomach, turning the organ inside out through its mouth and inserting it into the gap. Digestive enzymes flood the shell, liquefying tissues where they lie. The starfish absorbs nutrients externally, reeling its stomach back only once the prey has been reduced to soup. This strategy bypasses the problem of shells entirely. Where other predators crack or smash, the starfish dissolves. The consequences of this feeding behavior reverberate through ecosystems. In rocky intertidal zones, mussels often dominate, forming dense beds that monopolize space and exclude other species. Starfish regulate these monopolies, preying preferentially on mussels and opening patches of rock for barnacles, algae, and other invertebrates. This predator-prey relationship is so central that ecologist Robert Payne's classic experiments in the 1960s revealed the concept of the keystone species. When starfish were removed from experimental plots, mussels spread unchecked, diversity plummeted, and ecosystems homogenized. When starfish remained, biodiversity increased as their predation prevented any single species from monopolizing resources. The lesson was clear. Even slow, soft-bodied animals can wield disproportionate influence. The starfish, not the mussel, dictates the structure of the shore. But this influence cuts both ways. In the coral reefs of the Indo-Pacific, a different starfish tells a darker story. The crown-of-thorns starfish, bristling with venomous spines, preys on living coral polyps. In balance, its grazing thins dominant corals and encourages diversity. Out of balance during outbreaks where populations boom into millions, it devastates reefs. Vast swaths of coral can be reduced to bare skeletons in months, their complex habitats erased. These outbreaks are linked to nutrient runoff from land, which fuels plankton blooms that in turn feed starfish larvae. Human activity, once again, has amplified a natural process into ecological crisis. Yet even here, the principle remains. Starfish reconfigure communities, whether by dismantling mussel beds or stripping reefs. They are soft-bodied sledgehammers, quiet but transformative. The physiology that underpins this role is as extraordinary as their ecological effect. Starfish lack eyes in the conventional sense, yet possess photoreceptors at the tips of their arms, capable of detecting light and shadow. These rudimentary eyes allow them to orient toward prey-rich habitats and avoid open exposure. Their ability to regenerate adds another layer of resilience. An arm lost to predation can be regrown, sometimes even from a fragment as small as 1/5 of the body if the central disc is included. This capacity for regeneration not only aids survival, but allows populations to persist in dynamic, violent habitats where dismemberment is common. Their skin, studded with calcareous ossicles and spines, adds armor, while papillae, small skin gills, extend for gas exchange. Every part of their anatomy, though seemingly primitive, is refined for survival in niches where few others endure. Despite their slow pace, starfish are not passive. Their tube feet allow them to scale vertical walls, cross sand plains, and even open doors to aquaria. Observers who track their movements across tide pools find patterns of foraging that suggest memory and learning. They return to productive patches, avoid dangerous zones, and adjust strategies depending on prey defenses. This decentralized intelligence complicates our understanding of cognition, blurring the line between instinct and decision. They are not brainless automatons, but organisms that solve problems with distributed networks, bodies that compute by consensus of arms. The ecological services they provide extend beyond predation. By breaking down bivalve populations, starfish recycle calcium carbonate, contributing to nutrient fluxes that feed algae and other invertebrates. Their feeding scars on reefs, though destructive in outbreak numbers, can also provide settlement sites for corals and algae, shaping succession in complex ways. In every case, they are agents of reordering, catalysts of change that sculpt ecosystems both subtle and profound. The duality of their influence raises a broader truth. Power in nature is not always proportional to speed or size. The starfish does not race, it does not crush, it does not chase. Its strength lies in patience, in distributed persistence, in the inevitability of slow pressure applied over time. A mussel can resist a bird, a fish, even a crab, but not the starfish, which waits, pulls, and digests from within. Coral can withstand storms, parrotfish, and bleaching, yet when crown-of-thorns arrive in armies, even reefs fall. The starfish embodies the paradox of soft power, fragile in appearance, yet reshaping entire coastlines.
Picture the scene in time-lapse. Tube feet march across rock in steady procession. A mussel clamps shut, but the arms hold, patient and immovable. Hours stretch into days.
Then a stomach blossoms outward like a pale flower, insinuating into the gap. The shell yields, and life within dissolves. Pull back, and a bed of mussels shrinks. Patches of rock open, diversity flourishes. Pull back further still, and in another ocean, a coral reef lies bleached, starfish spines bristling as polyps vanish. The scale shifts, but the principle remains the same. Starfish quietly reorder communities for better or worse, depending on balance. In the end, the starfish is neither villain nor savior. It is a force, an architect of space and succession, a patient predator whose soft body belies its strength. To study it is to learn how ecosystems hinge on unlikely players, and how balance rests not on spectacle, but on quiet, persistent power. The seagrass meadow shifts gently in the tide, blades swaying like fields of wheat in a submerged wind. Small fish dart in and out of the thicket, shrimp hover in translucent clouds, and juvenile crabs cling to the stems. At first the scene seems tranquil, even uneventful, until the camera slows, focuses, and reveals the ambusher. A seahorse no larger than a finger clings with its prehensile tail to a single blade of grass. It sways in rhythm with the meadow, indistinguishable from its surroundings, its body mottled to match the greens and browns of the vegetation. Then, in less than the blink of an eye, the head snaps forward and a mysid shrimp vanishes into its tubular snout. The body does not move, the grass does not shiver, and the ambush is complete. This is predation on the smallest of scales, and yet it carries weight in the nursery grounds of the sea. The mechanics of this strike are hidden in the architecture of the skull. Seahorses belong to a group of fishes known as cyngnathids, which includes pipefish and sea dragons. All share a unique feeding adaptation, pivot feeding powered by an elastic hinge at the base of the skull. When prey drifts within range, the hinge releases stored energy, catapulting the head upward with blistering speed. The motion is so fast that it escapes notice in real time, lasting only a few milliseconds. At the same moment, the seahorse generates suction through its tubular snout, creating a vacuum that pulls the prey inward. Unlike larger predators that lunge with their whole bodies, the seahorse strikes invisibly, its attack confined to a pivot of the head. It is a weapon scaled perfectly to its prey, conserving energy while maximizing efficiency. To complement this feeding precision, seahorses are masters of disguise. Their skin is adorned with filaments, ridges, and knobs that mimic the textures of algae or seagrass. Many species can shift their coloration, blending seamlessly with kelp, coral rubble, or mangrove roots. Some turn pale to avoid detection against sandy bottoms, others brighten with oranges and purples to match sponges. Independent eye movement enhances this camouflage, allowing one eye to track prey while the other scans for predators. The effect is unnerving, a body that seems motionless, inert even, concealing a predator whose vision is constantly calculating. For prey, the meadow feels safe. For the seahorse, it is a theater of endless opportunity. But the seahorse's most extraordinary adaptation is not in how it hunts, but in how it reproduces. Among vertebrates, it is the rare case where males take on pregnancy. The brood pouch of a male seahorse is more than a simple container. It is a complex organ rich in blood vessels, capable of controlling salinity, oxygen, and nutrients. When females deposit eggs into the pouch, males fertilize them internally and begin gestation. The pouch environment mirrors the conditions of the surrounding sea, but at a stability that ensures embryonic survival. The male regulates oxygen levels, flushes out waste, and even transfers immune factors to the developing young. In some species, calcium deposition begins in the pouch, helping juveniles form their first bony plates. After weeks of gestation, the male undergoes contractions, expelling dozens or even hundreds of fully formed miniature seahorses. This reversal of reproductive roles has deep ecological implications. Because males bear the burden of pregnancy, female seahorses can invest in producing more eggs, maximizing reproductive output. Pair bonds often form, with males and females greeting each other daily in dances that reinforce synchronization. These rituals reduce the risk of wasted eggs, ensuring males are ready to receive clutches at the right moment. The dynamic shapes population behavior, with territories maintained not by aggression alone, but by partnerships that ensure reproductive efficiency. In a world of high predation risk and fragile habitats, such precision in reproduction is critical. The seahorse, however, lives on the edge of vulnerability. Its world is confined to seagrass beds, mangrove roots, and coral rubble, habitats that are among the most threatened in the ocean. Coastal development, pollution, and dredging have stripped vast tracts of seagrass from shorelines. Mangroves, cut for timber or cleared for aquaculture, no longer provide the tangled nurseries they once did. In their absence, seahorses lose both their camouflage and their anchoring grounds. Their tails, evolved to grasp and hold, cannot cling to open sand. Without their meadows, they drift helplessly, easy prey for larger fish. Populations collapse not because seahorses cannot feed, but because the stage on which they live has been dismantled. Conservation efforts reveal how tightly seahorses are bound to habitat. Where seagrass restoration projects succeed, seahorses return, anchoring once more to blades that ripple with tide. Artificial seagrass beds, while imperfect, provide footholds where natural ones have vanished. Marine protected areas that reduce trawling and anchor damage have shown measurable rebounds in seahorse populations. These micro-predators are small enough that even modest changes in habitat protection can tip the balance. Yet they are also fragile enough that continued loss threatens to erase them silently, long before most people realize they are gone. Despite their vulnerability, seahorses remain resilient in ways we do not always expect. Some species tolerate estuarine conditions, thriving in brackish water where other fishes struggle. Others adapt their camouflage to shifting environments, altering colors not just for disguise but as signals in courtship. Their very anatomy, armored in bony plates rather than scales, offers protection against bites that would cripple other small fishes. Their tails, square in cross-section rather than round, are structurally stronger and more resistant to crushing, an engineering marvel that has even inspired biomimetic designs in robotics. At every level, the seahorse demonstrates that being small does not mean being weak. Yet their role in ecosystems is subtle, almost invisible. They are not keystone predators like starfish or otters. They do not regulate forests or barrens. Instead, they are micro-ambushers, shaping communities of plankton, shrimp, and small crustaceans within nursery habitats. By feeding on mysids and copepods, they help maintain balance among planktonic grazers. By serving as prey for larger fish, they link the productivity of seagrass meadows upward into food webs. They are threads in the fabric, delicate but essential, stitching together energy at scales we rarely notice. Imagine the meadow again, the tide moving, the grass swaying. A seahorse grips a blade, swaying in rhythm, eyes scanning two directions at once. A shrimp drifts too close, the head pivots, and the prey vanishes. Multiply this act by thousands across the meadow, and the invisible becomes visible. Populations of crustaceans shaped, energy transferred, the nursery alive. Each seahorse is an anchor, not only to the grass blade, but to the flow of life that the meadow sustains. Their story is one of paradox, fragile yet armored, stationary yet predatory, male yet maternal. They do not roam oceans or reshape coastlines, but they remind us that ecosystems are maintained not just by giants, but by the smallest ambushers hidden in the grass. Precision, not power, keeps nurseries alive. In the final sweep of this narrative, the seahorse embodies the quiet truth of the ocean, that balance is written at every scale. A whale fertilizes basins with iron-rich plumes. A seal redistributes fear through kelp forests. A lobster patrols against urchins in the dark. And here, at the smallest scale, a seahorse clings to a blade, strikes in silence, and anchors a nursery. In that act, the ocean holds together.